From the sacred timeline of Loki's He Who Remains to the Kid Immortus future in the comics, here are the many variants of Kang the Conqueror.
Feels like a fresh start.
Starting with He Who Remains at the end of Loki's season. The season finale of Loki changes the usual way Marvel usually does things. Sure, the stakes are still just as high as always. The fate of the multiverse is at stake. But instead of a final battle between the hero and a dangerous villain that ends with the hero winning, the episode introduces a man in a purple cape with an apple in his hand who just wants to talk. He Who Remains never fights Loki or Sylvie, and since neither of them is a real hero, so no one wins in the end. This Kang tells Loki and Sylvie how the TVA came to be and why it exists to protect the so-called sacred timeline of the MCU. He does this after setting the stage for Loki and Sylvie to meet him.
Erupted into all-out war, each variant fighting to preserve their universe and annihilate the others.
Long before their conversation at the Citadel at the end of time, Kang was a scientist on Earth in the 31st century. He found that there were other universes on top of his own. Other versions of himself found out the same thing, and soon after that, they got in touch with each other. So when He Who Remains found a way to control the energy that could change time and space, he stopped it. That's when he made the TVA, an interdimensional bureaucracy that controls the flow of time and space. Now, you might be wondering what the timelines got to do with the TVA or this version of Kang, but it's pretty important. Loki finds that the TVA has been changed to look like one of the most dangerous variants. It looked like the war that He Who Remains talked about had already begun. The story that started with He Who Remains on an asteroid at the end of time will now continue in Quantum Mania, so you'll meet one of the variants that He Who Remains warned Loki and Sylvie about.
Who are you? I'm the man who can give you the one thing you want. What's that? Time.
As Majors recently told Total Film, his character in Loki and Quantumania will be very different people, and the actors treating them that way. He Who Remains is now called He Who Remained, but the fact that Kang's coming soon shows that it won't be the last time I see him, because no matter how many of his versions are killed, there'll always be an infinite number of them lurking around the multiverse. Now that I've talked about what you get to see on screen, let's look closely at the origin material. Many versions of Kang have shown up in the comics. While he made his debut in the MCU as a character called He Who Remains, that wasn't how he started out in the comics. He also didn't look like Kang the Conqueror.
We both just have to lose. I'm sorry, Cassie.
All of this shows that one of the Avengers' most famous and common enemies has a long and complicated history in the comics. In 1963, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby wrote and drew Fantastic Four number 19, when the first version of Kang appeared. But Kang's name was never mentioned during his first appearance. Instead, the bad guy's called Rama-Tut. He's a robotics student named Nathaniel Richards from the year 3000 who went back in time to ancient Egypt and made himself a pharaoh. The Fantastic Four meet him when they also go back in time to ancient Egypt to find a cure for blindness. He briefly holds them captive, but they manage to get away and send him running back to the future. Sounds interesting? Well, not as interesting as the time that Kang the Conqueror took over a dying planet. In Fantastic Four number 19, Kang made his first real appearance in the comics in 1964. In Lee and Kirby's Avengers number 8, the self-proclaimed Master of Time faces off against the Avengers wearing what would become his standard outfit, a blue mask with green and purple armor.
You're just a man.
Flesh and blood. Don't tell me I'm a disappointment.
No. Just a little bit easier to kill.
This time, the former Rama-Tut comes back from the year 4000 because he missed his way home by a cool 1,000 years. After taking over a dying Earth in the future, Kang the Conqueror shows up in the 20th century with new technology, including a very fancy chair and a new name. Of course, the Avengers beat him in the end, and he has to run away to the future again. Kang's changed more after that too. He's been the main bad guy in a number of Marvel stories related to time travel or multiple realities. Kang's manipulations of time make his life non-linear. All of his trips through history create different realities in which his past selves continue to make new versions of himself and new timelines. Once Kang finds out about this during an Avengers storyline in the 1980s, he makes the Council of Kangs. That's a group of all of his different selves from across time and space. In secret, he wants to get rid of his weaker selves from across time and space. Speaking of cool comic versions, this one's probably the coolest. This version of Kang the Conqueror shows up in the Avengers comics. It's the Scarlet Centurion, whose identity was particularly inspired by a meeting with Dr. Doom, who, by the way, might be related to Kang, but they don't tell us how. It's about a 21st century businessman named Mr. Griffin, a future version of Kang named Immortus, and an inventor named Victor Timely, who set up shop in early 20th century Wisconsin. There's even a version of Nathaniel Richards who, as a teenager, wants to avoid becoming Kang in the future, then goes back in time to modern-day Earth to start the Young Avengers and become a hero named Iron Lad. Between Loki, Quantum Mania Avengers, the Kang Dynasty, and everything else, it's hard to say how many different Kangs you'll see in the MCU's multiverse saga. When I talk about the Kang Dynasty, it's time to talk about the upcoming movie. It's set to come out in 2025 and will be the second to last Avengers project in Phase 6 and the multiverse saga as a whole. And from the looks of it, Kang's the main bad guy in Quantum Mania. But as that Avengers title shows, he still has a bigger role to play as Phase 5 begins. Quantum Mania is now in a position to help keep the big story on track. It'll build on the events and ideas introduced in Loki.
I don't enjoy hurting people. I don't enjoy it.
Just like Thanos, Kang, or some version of him being introduced a long time before this new saga's next big crossover event. Even though there are a lot of different Kangs, there are even more because there are so many different realities in the Marvel multiverse. Like, here's another comic book version. One of the better known Kangs comes from Earth X, also called Earth 9997, which became Universe X after a while. Everyone had superpowers in this dystopian alternate reality. Heroes who'd been around for a while were left to deal with a new way of life that led to some dark changes, but Kang kept going as usual. He changed his Immortus identity so that he could become the Pope of the Universal Church of Immortus. People like Spider-Man started to follow him. Not every version of the guy became Kang the Conqueror, though. When Nate Richards went back in time to become Kang, he eventually came back as Kid Immortus. Kid Immortus knew he was a bad guy, so he joined forces with Dr. Doom to beat the Fantastic Four and get back at his other selves who had tried and failed to stop them. Kid Immortus still tried to avoid becoming Kang the Conqueror, but Dr. Doom took his powers and those of Annihilus to make Doom the Annihilating Conqueror, a new dangerous form that threatened the whole universe. The merged bad guy was stopped by two teams of Fantastic Four, and Kid Immortus went back into the time stream. That's all of the many variants of Kang the